Touching upon the middle school section a little bit, the middle school theater company will be performing Annie Jr. this Friday and Saturday nights. So that's a great event to come out and support if you want to see some rising high schoolers and all they're accomplishing in their pursuits as well. And a lot of high schoolers are actually going to be in the show playing in the pit band, pit orchestra, directing. So we're staying involved within the broader community as well. And then finally, regarding our DECA chapter, so you may have already heard this, but over 26 FHS students traveled to Atlanta and competed at the DECA International Career Development Conference from April 23rd to 27th. And it was just an amazing opportunity. So once more, I'd like to thank you, everyone in this room. Thank you to administration. Thank you to you all for approving our trips, helping us get to Atlanta, helping us get to Boston for our competitions. It really means a lot, and it wouldn't have been possible without you. And a huge congratulations to the team of Drew Mahoney, Samin Sheikh, and Max Volmick. They finished top 10 in the world for their designated event. Another outstanding accomplishment. And then congratulations to another team. I was fortunate enough to be part of this team, but with my good friends, Audit Bhatia and Vaishnav Malhotra, we actually finished second place in our event, making it the first top 3 finish in an international DECA competition in Franklin High School's history. Again, just really proud of what we were able to accomplish, and it would have been possible without our great teacher, great advisor, Mr. Carmel and Mr. Canadette. So thank you to everyone here. That's all for me. So thank you so much.
Amazing update. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions so they can go? No? All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Dr. Hurd?
I don't want to follow that.
Too bad, you're up.
So I have several things for you and the community this evening. Maybe picking up where the students left off, I'll start later on in my update. One of the things that is coming up on May 19th is Empty Bowls, which returns to kind of its original format, its pre-pandemic format. It was modified, of course. It's a student-led fundraiser that supports the Franklin Food Pantry, and there's a club at the high school, Empty Bowls, that runs it. It's an amazing community event. Tickets are available on the Food Pantry website and are $20 for adults and $10 for children. There's a soup dinner for those attending. Everyone walks away with a souvenir bowl that the club makes all year round. And a silent auction will be held with handcrafted items. The date is May 19th from 6 to 8 p.m. I just want to extend our best wishes to the Franklin Footlighters. You heard a little bit about the high school students, and I appreciate them sharing some of the things that are going on for the younger schools. I just wanted to take a moment, though, to elaborate a little bit about the Footlighters. It's an exciting collaboration across all 3 middle schools. And at one point in time, we were faced with some budget reductions, and that was one of the items that had been removed from the budget. Within the past couple of years, we reorganized stipends and have been providing this opportunity. So sometimes I hear the narrative around that Footlighters got cut and we don't have it anymore, and we do. It's been restored. And so we're excited about the production of Annie Jr. This coming weekend. Faculty members Linnea Henningsen and Skylar Grossman are leading that program. And as they say in the business, we wish break a leg to the cast and crew. I know it sounds awful, but that's what they say. Just to add a little bit more detail to what the students shared about NHS induction, we want to congratulate the 88 inductees of the Franklin High School's National Honor Society. They're being recognized tomorrow evening in a ceremony that begins at 6 p.m. They have met the high standards of scholarship, leadership, character, and service. They completed over 5,000 hours of service, which included tutoring, 33 different student-designed individual and group service projects, and 2 general service projects planned by the officers. So that adds a little bit of detail to what Nipan shared. I want to thank the members of the Faculty Council. The Faculty Council participates in the selection. It is an incredible amount of work to go through all of the applications, and advisors Mr. Fiddler and Mr. Corona for their efforts with the program. Thank you to our PCCs for supporting our educators so profoundly last week. In particular, they're very supportive all the time, but last week during Teacher Appreciation Week, I did mention this at the last school committee meeting, but we do have a recognition this week on Wednesday, May 11th. It is School Nurses Day. So we want to ask you to keep the school nurses in your thoughts and wish them your appreciation. Want to share with the community an opportunity. In a couple of school committee meetings, we will share the Franklin results of the Metro West Youth Risk Behavior Survey and the highlighted indicators, not the detail that'll come in the fall, but the highlighted indicators. But the Metro West Health Foundation is holding a webinar on May 19th from 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. And I'll make the link available for registration to talk about trends in the Metro West region, things that they're seeing improvements on, and areas for kind of continued risk among youth in the Metro West region. As you may recall, our students take the Metro West Youth Risk Behavior Survey in grades 7 through 12. They took it this spring or winter, and we have some initial results from that came to us about a month ago. Backtracking in my notes, we are seeing, as you might imagine, with the news headlines, we are seeing an uptick in COVID cases in our schools. So I wanted to use this as an opportunity to just make sure people were aware of that. It's not just happening in Norfolk County or in the state of Massachusetts. We are experiencing it in the town of Franklin and in our schools, and ask people to consider their own personal risk and consider potentially returning to mask wearing. We do still have test kits coming in for students to pick up. And if anybody is interested in signing up for test kits, they can still do that through the CIC web portal. And we're going to send a message out to families to make that service available if people want to expand upon that. I did want to touch briefly about the situation with the report from Sharon High School related to the athletic fans, and continue to convey our sadness and anger in the report about abhorrent fan behavior. I want to confirm that we are actively investigating the matter at the high school, and the administration has been very busy doing that. And because it's an active investigation, I'm not going to comment too much further about it. But I did tonight want to thank community members who reached out in light of the emails that we sent with leads and additional information. I think it's important to note that people have reached out. It takes every member of a community to foster a safe, welcoming, and inclusive environment for everyone, residents and visitors alike. And we appreciate the cooperation. So I did want to note that. Again, as the investigation is underway, I don't feel it appropriate to comment further, but I do want to share and let you know we will issue an update to the community later this week. And lastly, my last note here is related to the Department of Education's review of our student services special education programs. A few weeks ago during the superintendent's report, I lauded, very appropriately, I think, our student services leadership for their contributions to the DESE tiered focused monitoring review. I also lauded our ESL leadership as well. The Office of Public School Monitoring visits each district and charter school every 3 years to monitor compliance with federal and state special education and civil rights regulations. DESE also visits to monitor compliance with the ESL regulations. We are pleased to share that in the area of special education, we had no findings in the area of special education, and we are fully in compliance. The program and department met all of the standards of the Department of Education. The report is on the website if anybody chooses to read it. And so again, kudos to the Office of Student Services for an excellent review. We will have information from ESL soon, and I will share that with the committee and the community as well. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahern. I'll go down the line. Committee Member Callahan.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. One wanted actually to start. Really love how that we have the opportunity between stating your report, what we have from the student representatives, what we the showcase that we had last week, and kind of what's coming up later today. That we really can kind of have time to really to shine a proper spotlight and kind of use a lot of the time that we have here to highlight the incredible excellence that we have across all of our students. It's fantastic, and I hope it's something we can continue to do to showcase all the amazing work that all of our students are doing. A couple other comments. One, in regards to the incident at the baseball game. Thank you for the swift rebuke of everything that was done. I know very quickly, even outside of kind of like the school committee channels, just as a parent, what I was seeing online, what I was hearing, I felt like there was a very small window from the time that I started to hear the news to when I was already receiving updates and emails about what the district was already doing. So I was glad to see that. And I was glad also just to hear that there was a community participation because this is a community situation that the entire community has to be able to rebuke itself, to be able to kind of push back on and say, this is not what we stand for, that just as what we're doing at the high school, that, you know, the no place for hate, that it's across the entire community. And I'm glad that you're already kind of hearing community feedback, and it's, at least to be able to see that pushback come as forcefully and as quickly was good given the circumstances. Something else too, we had when you talk about COVID and the numbers. So I know that there had been a couple of classroom closures over at ECDC. Is that because of an outbreak, but a large spike in the numbers, or is that just the staff is kind of so stretched thin that just one or two members being out because of COVID would cause it to close?
So it's a combination of things. We have COVID case numbers are ticking up among students and staff. And we also have things going on where people may be out for personal days or bereavement. So it's kind of a combination of things along with a reduced number of substitutes. So kind of a perfect storm and a combination.
And we say like a reduced number of substitutes. Is that like the pool of applicants? There just aren't that many substitutes that we can kind of reach out to?
Yep. Yeah, we just haven't had the same level of coverage this year or last year that we've typically had.
Okay.
We've tried a number of strategies to recruit. I think our director of human resources said she was interviewing 4 people yesterday, right?
Yes.
So
Okay.
It's an active process in terms of recruiting more subs, but it's been an ongoing challenge.
Okay. Thank you. And lastly, is there an update with the Jefferson principal and AP search going on?
So the last update that I provided to, trying to think of where it was, I can share with you, it was in the Jefferson family newsletter that went out. So the first search did not yield finalists. So we reopened and re-advertised for the Jefferson principal. We are pursuing all avenues to move quickly to identify a principal for the school. And, we're kind of actively underway in terms of recruitment there. So hope to have an update for the Jefferson community again soon.
Okay. And then and lastly, I promise, just to add on to that. So will we be still waiting to look into the AP, or are
Great
those things kind of
question.
running concurrently?
Yeah, those are running concurrently.
Okay.
That was another part of Ms. Klim's update in the newsletter. So we had originally thought about doing principal and then securing that person and then the assistant principal, and positions posted now so that we can build pools concurrently.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. I yield the floor.
Oh, thank you. Committee member Charles?
Yes. So I missed the date. So can you share what the date for the Metro West survey results?
May 19th to Thursday from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m.
Thank you. And then the other one, I missed the D&I director meet and greet last week just due to conflicts with soccer practice or something. Do we have us on the schedule that she'll be coming here to present or share her plans and thoughts?
So we are in the process of doing some reference checking following all of the site visits, and I'll keep you informed. Certainly what we typically do with leadership, once they're named, we introduce them to the school committee.
Thank you. Also.
Okay. Committee Member McNeil.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for all these updates. Looking forward to seeing the Metro West Youth Risk Behavior Survey results as they pertain to Franklin. I think particularly looking forward to next year's SWAC will be very pertinent to our work moving forward. So it'll be excellent to see that snapshot of what the specific needs of Franklin students are at this time. And then lastly, thank you also for giving us that update in regards to the investigation with the baseball game versus Sharon. We hope that yields results and that the appropriate consequences are able to be had, and so that very clearly does not reflect and represent the values of Franklin and who we want to be and are as a community. So thank you for sharing that.
Vice Chair Stokes.
No other questions. Thank you for the update and the great questions so far.
Committee Member Whitmore.
Thank you for the report. And I'm hoping for a swift investigation on what happened last Thursday, and was mortified to hear what took place. And I know that our community doesn't represent our community, so that's all I can say.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahern. All right, so on to guests and presentations.
Great. So first up, we have some guests joining us this evening. It's a full house, which is so exciting. 5 years ago, in the fall of 2017, we started the Unified Basketball Program at Franklin High School. And tonight we are joined by team members who are here. They have gone through a process that I hope they can explain to you this evening to compete for the honor of representing the state of Massachusetts in the Special Olympics in Florida in June. And they can tell you and the community a little bit more about the team and how they prepared for this. I will turn it over to Paula Morano to introduce the team a little bit further, as well as introduce our team's coaches.
So I am so proud to introduce tonight our fantastic unified basketball team who is representing the state of Massachusetts in Florida at the Special Olympics. I don't know if any of you have ever seen one of their games, but it is so exciting to watch them. And I have seen them the last few years, and to see them grow with their basketball skills, but also to truly represent inclusionary practices and what inclusion truly is, and our core values. I'm going to start tearing up because I'm so proud of them. So I am proud to introduce Coach Lisa Berger, who is really the one who is integral in really getting this team up and running all these years. And of course, Mr. Jeremy Rice, who is the other coach here, who's actually matching one of the players. I don't know if they planned that, but I did notice that, Jared. I think, did Mr. Rice get his style from you? I think so. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to leave it up to Coach Berger and Coach Rice to introduce our fantastic team who's here tonight to be with all of you. And hopefully they'll share some of their experiences on what they experienced when they went to training camp, and then the fundraiser game that they had just a few weeks ago, as well as what they're excited about in June when they go down to Florida.
Thank you so much for having us. This is a great honor to be here tonight. And I have the biggest honor to represent the fabulous group of 10 students that really have made this possible. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have a team. So it's Jake Boudreau, Delaney Lynch, Katie Jones, Peyton Boudreau, Megan Harmon, Jared Hamilton, Audrey Bonacci, Andrew Pepin, Tyler Brown, and Justin Knapp. in just a few short weeks, we do have 5 seniors on the team. So the morning after graduation, they are getting on a plane with us and we are going to Orlando, Florida for 9 days to participate in the 2022 Special Olympic Games, which is very exciting. They are the first interscholastic unified team from the state of Massachusetts to participate in these games, which is incredible accomplishment of these 10. And we've had quite the journey, which started in November, where we did fill out an application and we started out at a jamboree. And we do have a couple of members if they want to share a little bit about the experience. And
too tall for this.
Yeah, so we are, again, thank you so much for having us and for all of your support, but we are extremely excited. So yeah, we started our season, I think, if not all, close to undefeated. And then the Special Olympics came to us and invited us to a jamboree where we played against a few other teams where they then decided who would be the best fit. I think we really, really we just thought we had it in the bag after that night. It was awesome. I was almost tearing up at the end because I was like, oh my God, if we don't get it, it's okay. But it was an awesome experience. I think it was the first time we got to compete against other teams that were had our skill level and that really, where we can show off all of our teamwork. So that was awesome.
Yeah, sort of to agree. Back here, so a little bit shorter. But yeah, basically this whole experience for everyone has been amazing, especially with all the events that has happened. Because at the beginning, we sort of were just classmates, friends that you'd see down the hallways. But with this program, we started to know each other a lot more and became more of a family.
That. Yeah, so we had our weekend away, and it actually, I think it went very well, but we will definitely become much closer after our 9 days. It will definitely be, we'll see all sides of everyone, but we're very excited, and I think we have definitely become much closer of a team, and we're all a big group of friends now. Our team of 50 before, we all were close as well, but this team is just really tight now, so it's awesome.
Specifically about them a little bit more. What they also forgot about was just really how they did represent themselves and the town at those jamborees. One of the biggest things that we walked away with after those jamborees were other towns, and one was even a police chief that came up to us and said, how did you do this? How did you make it look so seamless? And these kids actually looked like they were having fun and friends. And our answer was really simple, nothing. We did nothing. We just got on the bus with them. And they did the rest. They really are an example of what inclusion and everything that these programs should stand for, and we could not be prouder of them. Thank you.
And as Delaney said, this is 10 of our best and brightest, but they're just a small part of our entire unified program. We have over 50 athletes between partners and athletes in the regular basketball team, unified basketball team, over 50 athletes and partners in the unified track team. And Lisa helped to launch the unified middle school basketball, which had over 80 participants. So not only is this team just a shining example as part of that and a product of it, but it shows that we are investing into the unified program for the town and just showing, what this town is capable of and the inclusion it offers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, proud doesn't even begin to explain how I think we all feel. I mean, being chosen to be able to represent Massachusetts at the Special Olympics Games in Florida is just such an accomplishment. I hope you're all so proud of yourselves. But it's also not a surprise knowing how hard you all have worked over these past several years with your tremendous regular season, as well as helping to create such a supportive and cohesive environment for your partners. I'm just going to say it. We have one of the best unified programs in the state, if not the country. So congratulations. You're all role models for the community,
especially our younger students who go to your games and watch and cheer you on. Every student deserves to be a part of a team and develop all the skills that go along with it. So thank you so much for all that you do. Training together and playing together truly is a quick path to friendship and understanding. So I know I speak for the full committee when I say we wish you nothing but the best of luck in June, and we'll be thinking of and cheering for you guys. So just the best of luck. I don't know if anybody else had anything else they wanted to add.
I wanted to ask, how was it playing on the garden?
That was really cool.
That was
Yeah,
fantastic
that must have
to
been
watch.
that must have been just nervous.
Just congratulations. I mean, it's amazing. This is the teamwork that you all have, and it just shows what we all can do when we come together, work together as a team, and really strive for greatness. So thank you all.
Again, congratulations on this amazing accomplishment and achievement that you guys are in representing not only Franklin, but the Commonwealth down in Florida. That's so awesome. It's just inspiring to hear, your stories of coming together, growing as a team, but also as friends. And I think, you just perfectly exemplify everything that Unified Sports Program can be, should be, and is. So thank you.
So no matter what happens in June, take the feelings you have now about pride and hard work and teamwork and effort and probably bits of mistakes and failures sprinkled in there, right? And take all that, and that's all going to help shape the humans you become in the future and the adults you grow into. And win or lose, it sort of doesn't matter, right? Like, it would feel good to win, but it's more about the journey. It's more about the path. It's not just about the destination. And so I think that's a good metaphor for life, really, is like, we're all here. Our lives are the path that we're on. And it's all about enjoying it right now and appreciating the people that you're sharing this time with. And so we're just so glad you're representing Franklin, and we're all there with you in spirit, and are so proud of, no matter what the outcome is. We don't really care about the outcome, I guess. It's like the bonding and the process of getting there. That's the really, really important part. So thank you for all your effort and work and friendship to each other. It's just inspiring.
Congratulations. You're making Franklin very proud, and I'm really happy to hear about the friendships that you guys have forged with this. So congratulations again.
And we want an update when you get back. So just prepare, okay? Thank you so much for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it.
Best wishes.
Yeah.
And yes, you can go.
Scoop. Yeah.
Good luck, everyone.
Get out of here.
Good luck.
Thank you. Dr. Ahern, our next guest presentation.
Sure. So this evening, we have a presentation related to approaches in Franklin Public Schools related to student behavior. This was a request of the committee last summer when we were planning the presentation schedule. Lucas has been working with administrators across all buildings around the code of conduct, and there were some revisions, and they're happy to explain more this evening with you. We're also joined by Principal Josh Hanna from the high school, as well as Principal Craig Williams from Remington, and they can come up to the table.
Those are some tough acts to follow throughout the evening. So
do our best.
So thank you to the community. Thank you to the school committee for the opportunity to present tonight. Originally, when we scheduled this, I think we called it, I had an earmark that said like discipline presentation. What we've come to learn is that discipline is one piece of a bigger picture that we're aiming towards for our schools. And I think we changed it to approaches to student behavior because we wanted to encompass some of the things that are occurring. So I'll just start and we'll do some, you already have introductions. I think you know the folks from Dr. Ahern's intro, but I'm pleased to be joined by middle school principal and a high school principal with multiple years of experience in their roles, and having served as assistant principals, which the bulk of the job kind of circles around this work. It's important to have those perspectives. So I want to thank you both for joining, for being here.
Our pleasure.
Yes. All right. So just an overview. Even tonight we're focusing on some of the responses and some of the things that we do related to student behavior, which do include discipline. But it's just important that we keep in mind a holistic approach. I think about a quote from Desmond Tutu, who talks about, rather than just focusing on fishing bodies out of the river, we need to go look upstream and see what's causing it. What really that speaks to me about is really, we'll focus on kind of this stage of where we're at and how we address behavior. But I want it known, just to be clear tonight, there's a bigger picture on how we address and prevent and try to educate. That's included a little bit here, but I think it would deserve its own presentation, to be quite honest. So. Okay. So we aim to provide a safe learning environment for all kids that enter our schools. We're really focused on trying to incorporate respect. I know in previous presentations, you've seen respect listed as a core value for each of our schools in some form or fashion, and we look for ways to incorporate that in the classroom, but also at the team level and at the grade level and school level. And finally, we really look to promote a growth mindset where we try to create learning opportunities for mistakes while also balancing that with some accountability when mistakes are made. I think that balance, I think about my own role as a parent, I think it's important to kind of look for both. I think you can't just have education and you can't just discipline if you really want to have the best results. And I think having both makes the most sense, and it's an approach that we've used within the district. Just a little background, spring 2020, many people remember that. You see some acronyms up there, APPLC. That means our assistant principals worked together in a professional learning group to look at that book, Shifting Gears, and try to look at how we could reframe some of the approaches and responses we were having to discipline. And at that time, it was pre-pandemic when we really began that work, but it continued into really professional learning on how we could look to restructure and look at how we respond. We'll talk a little bit later about our evolution with that, but that's where the work began. In summer of 2020, you may have noticed as parents, or if you were on the committee, we reframed some of our code of conduct to be called a code of conduct, character, and support. And we started to slowly start to incorporate pieces of how we would clarify and set expectations for expected behavior, as opposed to just having what you're not supposed to do, but also what you're supposed to do in situations. So trying to frame it a little bit differently and try to create some education for kids along the way. And finally, in fall of 2021, the high school and the middle school, after coming out of COVID with the COVID addendums, we had updated those and brought that into our regular handbooks and how we operate throughout the day to really look at starting to tier our behavior. And we were in the initial stages of that in the fall, and that's continued work that we could speak to.
So as we know, the best solution to any problem is prevention. So a lot of our tier 1 strategies are based off of proactive approaches for all students. Ways in which we can really be setting clear expectations for a respectful school environment. This comes through whole group meetings in the middle level and high school, working to leverage our advisory program in which students can learn important social emotional skills such as conflict resolution, self-control, self-awareness to help them be able to meet behavioral expectations. Also looking to utilize morning meeting in the elementary school, as well as team time and a flex block with student handbook assemblies that occur at the start of the year to set expectations. And then we often will revisit those throughout the year as the year goes on for reminders at key points during the school year. We're also providing opportunities for different mental health screenings to get a sense of, behavior is a form of communication. So what are these behaviors communicating to us? And through screenings, we're able to be more proactive. In classrooms, our teachers are focused on providing class meetings to really focus on the overall environment, the relationships that are being built, and through social emotional learning routines, as well as also their small group instruction for SEL skills, possibly maybe some of those mental health screenings, or through different observation data or learning plans. Certain students are provided with small group instructions of how to work in a group, how to interact with others throughout their schedule and during their day. That said, we can provide that, the proactive approaches, the positive learning environment, the safe learning environment, but we also will see behaviors that do not meet expectations. So, some of the tier 1, the lower level infractions, like not complying with classroom rules or norms, not responding to maybe what the staff is asking them to do, possibly making excessive disruptive movements or noises, not working well, playing well with others on certain tasks, doing some off-task behaviors, and arguing maybe with what a teacher might say. But those are some of the behaviors that are most often, a teacher is handling that, more times than we can possibly imagine during a class. With great skill, grace, and patience, but some of those responses can be, student conferences, one-to-one conferences, providing a verbal warning, communicating home in some way, shape, or form. Could be a teacher detention in which it's after school or during the movement break in which they have time to process with that teacher, and add some reflective pieces of what the infraction was and what the student can do to help make it right and to help prevent making that decision the next time, and what ways can the teacher support that student in making the appropriate decisions.
So I'll jump in here and talk a little bit about tier 2, but to just kind of connect the tier 1 and the importance of, when we work on creating low student to teacher ratios, it allows for those relationships to be manageable enough for teachers to interact with families on a consistent basis and kind of nip any behaviors in the bud right away. So we know from our experience that 99% of student behavior will be addressed once the teacher connects with the family and lets them know, like, hey, here's some things we're observing. We're not trying to turn this into a tier 2 or tier 3. We're being proactive. And so we really want to set our teachers up for success with creating environments where they can do that without being too, overwhelmed. Because what we then see at the tier 2 response is more office support, where, as an example, in the high school with 3 assistant principals, each assistant principal dealing with close to 600 students with a variety of ups and downs, so to speak, becomes a lot less personal, and it has to. Right, because the infractions tend to be a bit more serious, and the amount of time that they have to kind of connect individually with families isn't as readily available. And so we really try to keep most things in tier 1. And honestly, our staff does an amazing job with that. I think not just at the high school, but across all of the grades. Their commitment to building relationships is the most important part of, redirecting student behavior. But again, tier 2 is more, okay, the teachers implemented their system and it's just not working. There needs to be continued more follow-up. And you can see as some examples of things that are occurring, things that are really disruptive to the classroom environment. It can no longer be allowed to occur, and there needs to be additional support. So at our school, a tier 2 response would be, something like an immediate referral to the office, where the adjustment counselor and the assistant principal would work tandemly to kind of understand whatever the complexities of the situation are, and then alert the proper folks, and then determine where on the scale does this belong. If this is a first offense where we've just learned that something, dramatic or traumatic has occurred in the student's life, then that's going to involve one response. If this is like the 5th time that this has happened, we've already had multiple meetings, and we're going to kind of follow, even though we don't deep down think a suspension is necessarily going to fix the situation, we know we have a protocol to follow to help elicit additional supports. And that's all part of the process of, being a disciplined assistant principal. So you can kind of see where we're still bringing families in. It just tends to be with a bit more formality. you'll hear perhaps friends of yours who, have students that are involved in something like that. They'll be getting letters, there's hearings, there's processes to make sure that we're taking these things very seriously. There's no misunderstanding, but it's definitely a different approach than the tier 1. Tier 3, which now we're evolving, and we're going to get, kind of connected to some investigation talk after this. These are the most, short of the expulsion type behaviors that would include like assaults on staff, weaponry in the school, large scale drug dealing. The tier 3 are some of the most egregious acts that we see at our school, and we don't see them regularly, but we certainly have a category for them. Bullying and harassment is one we spend a tremendous amount of time on, kind of vetting through, particularly around social media use, oftentimes off campus, who said what to whom, how many different, TikTok accounts or Instagram accounts were involved, and to what extent can we identify who was involved with them. And we know, and we spend a tremendous amount of time investigating these interactions because we know they have serious impact on students' ability to learn. And I think, what Lucas said at the very beginning, which is this idea of creating a safe environment, we don't just mean safe from a standpoint of not feeling like you're going to get shoved. I mean, that's like a baseline expectation. What we really want are people to be able to come peacefully in and out of the building, to have access to the curriculum that they're excited about and learn it without fear of any distractions. And we're up against a lot when it comes to that. And so we are navigating student needs, in my opinion, at a very high level, again, with the support of our assistant principals and our adjustment counselors, to understand the complexities of where students are and try to put those things into play. And in many cases, both the aggressor and the victim are misunderstood and misunderstanding the interaction that occurred. So we'll have these moments where, we'll hear, okay, this event occurred. And as we get deeper into the investigation, we realize that the aggressor may not have completely understood how this was being communicated, particularly, I'll say, around social media use. So we have different levels of behavior that occurs at the school. And with all those different levels of behavior, we have different responses. We love to keep things within the classroom because we feel like that gets the most intimate, positive results. But yet we have systems for investigation, short-term and long-term suspensions as well when necessary.
Just before we run through the investigation steps, we have consistency among our administrators when we field information. One of the pieces we look for is this having an impact on school? From there, we have not only an obligation, but a moral responsibility to try to get to the bottom of it. So as Josh said, students can re-enter and feel comfortable to navigate the school day in a way that allows them to pursue what we're all here for. They're here to learn. And a lot of those distractions we try to eliminate through this process. So Craig and Josh, you want to walk through just some of the pieces and steps that you take?
Absolutely. So, what will launch a general investigation? There's a variety of ways in which we can receive the information, whether it be parents send us an email after having a conversation with the student bringing it forward, or one of their friends being an ally and bringing it forward. And once we receive that information, our number one goal is to go back to something that Josh talked about in terms of safety, is to make sure that that we can provide a feeling of safety for that student. And so that's where it comes in terms of the supportive measures. So that's where we look into, okay, we know we're going to be investigating here, but we need to make sure, is the student going to see that student that is causing them questions of their safety in their next class? So what can we do to help you? Does that mean that we need to have the counselor just be a presence in that classroom? Is that going to help them feel safe? Do they need to come and have maybe access their education for that period in the counselor's office or in an assistant principal's office to do the work, so they're not being put into that classroom while we're conducting that investigation? Then what we'll do is we'll make sure that we're making the parents and guardians part of that conversation. What's going to help them feel safe about their student being in school during that time? We'll start to make sure that we're collecting during this time as much evidence as possible. Unfortunately, this is often social media posts, and seeing what we can do to say, okay, do you have screenshots of this? And trying to have them the students often, or the families, send them to us. That is one of the, as many of you know, if you've walked into our schools, our signal in our schools isn't always the best. So when they're trying to send you a screenshot of their Snapchat, that can take quite some time, and you might not get them until the next day, but we do the best we can to try to make sure we have that evidence. Once we're doing that, that's where we often say, it's either myself or my assistant principal, Danielle Champagne, say, okay, who's going to give Central a call to fill them in on what's happening. We run through this procedure with Lucas, often as being the point person, to make sure that we're going through the necessary steps after we receive some of the evidence. Then we're really starting to be in that information gathering phase. We're going to examine what the initial claim is, and develop what our strategy is going to be. And we'll do the best we can to conduct as many interviews as possible that won't also then compromise the outcome of the investigation, and make sure that we get a sense from the target who are possible witnesses, who are some possible people that are going to have insight into what happened. While that's going on, we want to, again, continue with the safety measures and interim measures, and also recognize, Josh said there's a level of formality that occurs when these things happen to come to the principal. And I think Josh and I are approachable guys, but at the same token, when you're a student, having to talk to your principal about a social media incident that occurred, that can be nerve-wracking. Understandably so. And so we might, if that student has another trusted adult, we might bring that trusted adult as part of the conversation, just as a support for that student while that's going on, or as a witness as well. And also something that we truly consider is the idea of ways in which we can maintain the confidentiality for every student involved. So if you're a target, and like I said, the situation in which they might be in the same classes with some of the students that they're having these issues with, and we're investigating, we might find ways to we won't pull that student out of the class in which it has, or do our best to make sure that we're not pulling that student out of the class that they have with a possible aggressor, so that the aggressor is like, oh, they were called down to the office. What happens? We try to be as subtle as possible. Possibly have that student run an errand to get something in the office, and then have that conversation. Try to do it, like I said, in a more subtle way. So that's kind of as we're going through that interview process.
What are we picking up on now? Sorry. I need glasses. I'm not ready to admit it. All right, but I definitely need them. So as we begin to remind the parties, like, hey, as an investigation, it's important for you not to be sharing this information. And, it is a balance as we get into these questions around particular environments. And certainly the high school has spent quite a bit of time over the last 72 hours or so working on getting to the truth. And I think that's a really important part of understanding the investigation. It isn't a matter of someone said something that is provocative in nature, and so it must be true. And now it's the school's responsibility to prove that, because that was the first thing that was said. And I think that there are a lot of people that will hear something and immediately say, well, that must have happened. How could someone have said that? And why hasn't anything occurred yet? And although I suppose one could take that approach, that's not like the right way to go about finding the truth. The truth's going to take a lot longer. And of course, with social media and other ways to communicate, that getting to the truth isn't always as quick as folks would like. And so we're very cognizant of that demand, but we're also very professional in what we are going to eventually say. And in these investigations, we do have a finding, and the finding is based on the truth. And to get to the truth sometimes takes time. So I guess I would just put that as a caveat as we're understanding these steps. You start to schedule appointments with people. You allow for family to be involved. Perhaps you have folks that are out of town. These times, and it takes time to create a safe environment, organize your questions in a way that's defendable. I mean, when we begin these at our school, we are of the opinion that this is going to go a lot further than our walls. And so we would be able to defend our processes at the highest court, because that is where it can end up, depending upon, the parties involved and the facts of the case. And so there is a very deliberate nature to this work that's far from, I think, what movies have portrayed as someone comes down, you just say you've done it, and now we're moving on. That's just not the way it goes. And when you're dealing with large parties of different perspectives, it's really important to hear them, ask the right questions, and detail your response.
Can I add something to that, Josh?
Sure.
I think also, just as an administrator, as you do conduct investigations, there's also the court of public opinion that you're trying to balance. So when you try to do the fact finding with the details that you have, there's often a pressure, an external pressure with information to try to understand. And sometimes what's lost in that is when you're trying to gather facts, and if you have to be the person who's going to sit in front of a family and a student and dole out disciplinary consequences and do that, you have to make sure that you're grounding all that in facts that you've gathered from the case. And we'll talk about due process, but I just wanted to piggyback on that because I do feel, from the sense from a family or folks who may have heard of something, and I'm not relating this to any particular event, but just that sometimes things get out publicly. And oftentimes, as an administrator, they're really starting to get their strategy and start to pull students, but the information moves faster than sometimes they can even organize. So I think that does create a tension for families on wanting information and wanting it as soon as possible. And I think that's a natural expectation. And we should have an expectation to have information as soon as it's available. And we want to commit to that, but certainly want to make sure that we follow a process that's appropriate through that. So.
And the last couple of bullets are in terms of determination. So after all the investigation has occurred, a finding is established, and whether or not there's going to be substantial discipline will be written and explained, and there's a hearing process for the for the person that's going to have the discipline issued and their family to kind of ask questions about it. So the way that goes is you kind of like explain what was person was accused of, or whatever the facts of the case are. You explain your findings, here are the reasons, and you give kind of like a general spectrum of what could be the discipline. That's part of the expectation that you kind of bring with you to this hearing. Like this could be something of like a 3 to 6 day outside of school suspension, let's just say as an example. And then you allow for the feedback. Are there extenuating circumstances? Are there other pieces of information that haven't been shared at this point? This is now your opportunity. And then you digest that and give them a formal response with a letter within 24 hours. So that's kind of how the determination and notification process goes with these moments. It's quite formalized. And I do believe, because most people don't spend a lot of time in these hearings, there's probably a lot of concern, intimidation. I know I see a lot of families and students will clam up. They'll get very nervous. They don't know all of the things. It's really done with the intent to press pause. Let's have a timeout here. There's room to get better under these circumstances. We need this moment as an individual, as your family, as a community. And if we don't do this from time to time, then we're really not caring for you, because whatever has occurred here isn't okay. But we're not trying to end your potential for growth as a human being. That's not the big idea. Unfortunately, I think when people get into these hearings and these moments, that's how folks feel, because it's so formalized. So I think we as an administrative team try to strike that balance of, caring and saying we believe in this process for growth, even though right now it feels like we're just judging you and saying you're not welcomed here. That's not really the want, but that ends up being kind of how folks feel, I think, having, done this for a handful of years. So.
Josh, you basically just described, you can hit the next slide, due process.
Sorry.
No, that's good. I think it's fine. It's sequenced well. So he talked about the hearing and the opportunity, and then to provide any other information. I would just hit on confidentiality. That comes up a lot as well. There's a want from a victim, and I can totally understand this, is a want for transparency and often to know what the consequences are for another student. And we put it in the slide, and I think we have a goal to put some more front-facing information out for folks around some of these processes and confidentiality, but we're really restricted as administrators to provide student record information, particularly with anyone who's not the custodial parent of a child, to that detail. And I know that that's another tension Sarah and I talk about sometimes is, people's want to know, whether a group of people, a community, or an individual who's been harmed. Victims have feelings in this, and oftentimes there's pain and hurt involved. So it's really hard in those conversations when I talk to all the principals around what can be shared and what can't. It's not to evade or not talk about it. Frankly, there are a lot of hard conversations happening when you dole out discipline to a family. And you want to tell the victim oftentimes, like, let me tell you how this went. Let me explain what we've done. But that's certainly a tension that we face. And I don't have a solution to that, except to think about how we can communicate behaviors and what the results of those behaviors typically become. And we'll hit a little bit more on that. But I just wanted to put that out there because I think confidentiality is said often, but there's a real requirement around that. And I would just say, if your child was the person who was accused of something, there's two things you would want. You would want a fair process where all the facts were gathered before determination was made, and then you'd want their privacy respected throughout that process. And it's hard when you're on the victim side, but if you are accused as an aggressor or someone who's done something wrong and it's been found, those are two things that I would just point out, just to frame this a little bit.
And the other piece of this is obviously we've talked about due process as it goes with suspension. And, we hope that it's known that we're taking a holistic approach. It's not just suspending, that we're looking for, there might be a suspension, but also provide opportunities for students to learn, to grow, to repair from an incident. One of the methods is, for example, during a possible in-school suspension, having a student work very closely with a counselor or with an administrator to do an educational experience about the impact of possibly their words or their actions and what they can do to try to prevent that from happening. It often ends up happening sometimes during that in-school suspension because there's not a lot of great time during the day to do that. And this provides that opportunity to press pause and have that conversation before the student heads back into the classroom and in the learning environment. And really, we wanted to provide this slide as well about what really is a restorative approach. And the intention being that we want the students to be able to take action to repair harm, problem solve, and learn new behaviors. The process are done by a student with support, not done to a student, and really looking for problem solving and problem analysis. Having the students really reflect of who is impacted by this, who is impacted by their behaviors, what they're going through now, what they're thinking about their actions, as well as then what can they do to make it right, and what actions might they take if they're put into this scenario again. Because the reality is there's a very good chance they might be in some type of similar situation. And we just want to encourage them to do better and teach them to do better. And it really aligns well with this quotation of, if a child doesn't know how to read, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to swim, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to multiply, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to drive, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to behave, teach, or do we punish? And the thought of being, why can't we finish the last sentence as automatically as we do others?
Backwards here. So there's been an evolution in this approach. And like I said, it needs to be balanced, right? Supportive accountability. There's a few different phrases for it. I can think of a time, and I know that you both probably remember, where we just listed things you don't do. And you probably remember that from your own high school handbook. Don't, and whatnot. Some evolutions that have occurred at the state level. In 2014, it was an expectation that principals exercise discretion and look for ways and consider ways to re-engage students, right? And try to avoid using long-term suspension. So that came out, and that's in the Mass General Law. And then in 2015, through an advisory, they put out more language that talked about limiting the use of suspension as a consequence for misconduct. It certainly doesn't mean that we can't, but it means that we need to be thoughtful about how we do it and sometimes how we leverage it. So if we can leverage out of school paired with in school, and then during that in school is where we do our education and our training and work with students in a variety of ways. We can get creative because what we've learned is, in some of our offenses, you can't punish out addiction, you can't punish out certain behaviors. So we try to look at it as, how do we mark the moment, create an opportunity to be held accountable, but also educate at the same time.
So as an example in practice, in terms of like modifying our approach, if you look at, as Lucas just mentioned, addiction, if you look at drug use or possession, for a long time, it was an automatic out 10 days, no questions asked. No one really even considered like consult regarding why it is that you maybe were using or in possession. And we've adjusted, not just here in Franklin, but across the state, really partnering with local addiction centers to try to find ways to educate around addiction pathways. And the results have been overwhelmingly positive. Like if we connect with the education piece to understand the behavior, inevitably the students do not repeat. And so it's a shorter suspension, which I think, depending upon your mindset, you may say, oh, that's too weak. Like, how could someone only get this if they were to do that? But the reality is, when you couple it with education, what we've seen is a very limited number of repeat offenders. And so I think as we continue to grow in this work around what are the consequences, the more education we can wrap into the experience of, I've just done this, what does that mean about me? We're talking about young people. I mean, some at the high school certainly look older. They're tall and potentially strong, but they're still very young developmentally, and they need support. I mean, I think most of us in this room are still in a process of growing intellectually, right? And like with our own behavior and so on. At least I know I am. And I feel like when you're 18, I mean, that you're beginning the next chapter. I think you quoted Aerosmith earlier, life's a journey, not a destination, right? But that's the idea, is like we honor that and we want to try to like incorporate these moments. It's just when there's with drugs, it's a little easier because it's kind of like the possession or the use is them. It's the harassment and bullying and vandalism, because that act was against someone else. The victims and others aren't as comfortable adjusting the consequence to involve education because there's someone that's been hurt. You know what I mean? So I think that is where we're moving towards, but I think Craig can offer some examples of those.
Yeah, I think it's, thinking about when you do have a student who is an aggressor in a bullying situation, they're still part of your community. And you want to make sure that, when you're thinking about why they were a bully, oftentimes it's because of their own insecurities and their own lack of skills. And so I think that's where you want to strike that balance of making sure they still feel part of your community, making sure that they feel that there's levels of accountability, but the rest of your school community feels safe and supported as well. So that's why I think we're always walking and trying to strike that balance of what's going to support the student that's in front of me, but what's also going to be supporting the other 400, in my case, in Josh's case, a little bit more, but 400 students throughout the building and with bullying or harassment incident.
Right. So tracking and monitoring this area, all of those high level offenses that result in investigations, we track in Aspen, which is our student information system for suspensions, anything really warranting a high level of discipline or whatnot. Tier 2 at the high school, because there's 1,700 kids, teachers making referrals to 3 different assistant principals. We use Aspen through their workflow process. They have like a conduct module where they send the information. So I'm going to write up Craig, I'm going to send it. It's going to go to Josh because that's who's assigned, and then Josh gets this queue and he can see his students, and then he can work through and see what the issues are, call the kids in, have that conference, work through some of the examples that we gave earlier today. And that's a system that works for us for tracking. At the K-8 level, there are school-based tracking systems. There's 2 things. There's a philosophical piece around Aspen, which is our student information system. When we're talking about 2nd graders and 3rd graders, to start to think about inputting that information into the system and carry through senior year, feels like it philosophically doesn't necessarily rise to that level. The big behaviors are things that we would look to track, but certainly not the day-to-day things. Also, at the high school, the teachers are often referring and creating a referral. To manage that at an elementary and a middle level, that would mean that every time someone came down, you'd have to create this referral and enter it. So we've come up with streamlined ways in which to do that through the school-based tracking systems. And on tier one, we talked about the proactive piece, but also the responses, those are locally kept. If a teacher has a teacher detention, they keep track of that, because if there's a repeated pattern, that's when it gets referred. And typically the referrals will say, I already spoke to Johnny about this on November 2nd, and this behavior's continued, and I need someone else to kind of weigh in. So
we wanted to give you an idea of what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis. So some of the behavioral trends that have been occurring. These are, I'd say, these things were happening prior to COVID. I think that's a really important clarification. But what we're seeing is upon the return is a slight escalation as back into the swing of being in school every day with their peers and receiving adult interaction and feedback. So, with the middle level, what we're seeing some common behaviors, oftentimes really during some unstructured times, non-compliance with classroom expectations, not responding to adult prompts and requests, and some physical contact or infringing on personal space. When thinking about the not responding to adult prompts, you think of what the virtual learning environment for, I can speak to our middle schoolers, while they're in class on a Google Meet, if they're not, if they did not want to respond to a teacher's prompt, they could turn the camera on or just sign off the Meet. And so those skills of interacting with adults on such a frequent basis weren't utilized. They're there. They're being, we're getting them back to used to doing that. But they went they could have gone unused in certain ways. And then you can see the longing for person-to-person contact. Our students, they walk down the hall, and it's like there's this magnet, that like magnetism of like just needing to hold on to each other, as if at any moment they might not see their friend the next day. But with that, unfortunately, then can lead to a push and a shove and then an escalation. So, I think that's where it's that use of, well, they're my friend. Yeah, but you're still in school and you need to respect people's physical space and personal space.
Yeah, I would say, obviously this school year, we've seen behavior that's pretty much unprecedented across the nation. Certainly in the 20 plus years I've worked in a high school, I'd never seen such a consistent amount of disruptive behavior as we did at the beginning of the school year. There's no doubt about that. And our list is what we ran a report, and these were the most consistent infractions we had this school year. And a lot are a result of a struggle to get back, right? We took a break and it took a bit of a time to get back into shape. I would love to call out last Friday night, almost 500 students, as Robin called, peacefully traveled from the high school out to Lombardo's. We had a great prom. The dancing was fantastic. They all ate dinner peacefully and enjoyed each other's company, took pictures. So to me, that's the sign of evidence that we've come a long way. I think if we would have had that event in September, I'm not quite sure if the outcome would have been the same, but the work is getting done and we're getting better. And that to me, it was just like a highlight of the last few months. And to hear Robin talk about how he enjoyed being with his classmates, that's what it's all about. And we need to continue these social interactions with adults there on the side, guiding, redirecting. I think Craig made a really good point in the fact that to go a year and a half without having those consistent, adult leaders in your life, teachers, counselors, coaches and things, kind of giving you that feedback day to day, minute to minute. And without that, it was hard. It was hard to then reach the expectation that we had. So bottom line, we've seen behaviors that we're not okay with. We've made the adjustments and we continue to recognize our students still need a lot of guidance. Anytime we have unstructured or undersupervised, I'll say, not unsupervised, but undersupervised areas, that's where some of the more kind of like egregious, acts occur. And so it's our responsibility to organize ourselves around that, but also hope to build up the skills of our students to kind of hold each other accountable and recognize that, these things aren't okay. But honestly, if you look at those lists, even before COVID, tardy to school would be 100% the most consistent high school discipline situation. So that really isn't all that new. It's just that the sheer number really overwhelmed our systems at the beginning of the year. I think we're getting to a place now where we're able to manage it on a much more consistent basis.
So as far as next steps, we have 2 slides that kind of hit on where do we go from here. There's a lot of information we've put out to you. I know that some of it may be overwhelming, but I'm encouraged by the team that we have and the work that we're doing. And these are just a few examples of things that we're planning. I was saying earlier prior to the meeting around the need for us to reset. I think everyone will benefit from a break and then reset and come back. And we've learned so much this year. But I want to take this opportunity while I have this platform to just speak on behalf of the work that our principals and our central office staff and administrators are doing every day. They really are balancing an ecosystem. And these are examples of when an ecosystem can get off track and off kilter. And there's an expectation and there's a responsibility to keep it on track. They work tirelessly to really work on behalf of kids and create the best experience and support our staff and our amazing educators. But they're humans as well. And they have families. And they've lived through this most recent pandemic, but just in this field. And it's not easy. And they work really hard every day. And the work and dedication I see them put into really trying to think proactively, but also investigate and repair situations and educate and sit at tables with families on all different sides of the perspective. I just wanted to kind of point that out and say that, I think the grace that people have shown along the way has gone a long way. I hear that a lot from principals around people who approach this with concern and maybe have issues, but can certainly communicate it effectively and work with them because ultimately we're all geared and wired towards really resolving conflict and resolving issues so that we can get back on track and focus what we're here to do, which is to educate kids and provide a positive learning experience. So I wanted to just say that, and I'll transition into some of our next steps. We are continuing to implement a tiered system of support. So when I think about the MTSS pyramid, you have an academic side, but there's also a behavioral side. And we are looking at this holistically, as I said, and that will continue. One example on the behavioral side is we're looking to align our school-based tracking that occurs K-8 to become level-based for consistency so that the data we pull, in order to have a solid MTSS model, you need solid data. So we're looking to see what we can pull for trends and try to capture some of that work and capture some of the things that are occurring across schools and across levels at the K-8 level. We're looking to leverage student advisory using some curriculum-based resources. You see some examples there. Second Step, which has an elementary and a middle school program. They also have, we use Responsive Classroom, which is a strategy-based model as well as other resources and opportunities. And these are just some examples of some of the topics that we plan to cover and do cover. I know that there's some plans to cover some of these areas this spring and then do it again, obviously, next year as well. As you know, we've been in the process of the equity audit. There will be findings from that, prioritized areas, along with short-term and long-term goals that we'll look to implement. And those related to student discipline or student support will be incorporated into our next steps as well. And using the student data to prioritize our areas of focus, whether it's advisory topics or a focus for our administrative team or information for our community. If we're seeing a spike in specific behaviors, giving our parents and guardians that information so that we can work together. Continuing with our staff training, we have that new bullying policy, which is being reviewed with our staff. We'll do that again and incorporate that into our mandatory trainings annually, as well as the new teacher orientation. and also provide more training on some of those restorative practices and how we can work with students. And that's a framework as well that was going to require some time. And communication. We have a bullying intervention plan we're ready to share with our community to get feedback. It, as I said, mirrors the bullying policy that was recently adopted. And we're also looking to develop a discipline matrix that we'll include in the handbooks. When I talk about a reset, we also need a reset from the school year so that we can start and communicate out expectations and any types of changes or modifications you want to make to the handbooks. That happens over the summer so that we can start the year with everyone signing off on the expectations and any changes that take place within our practices and policies. And finally, around communication is we are looking for ways to provide more forward-facing information about disciplinary practices and procedures. We talked about when you're at a table with a family around some of these consequences. We're wondering and we're looking for ways in which can we provide some of that ahead of time so that people can know what to expect. And that might help a parent in that regard. Okay.
So I think what we'll do is we'll just one at a time, like one question, and then it'll be Al's turn.
Why are you looking at me?
I'm looking at you.
Explicitly, yeah.
One question, go. Or comment, doesn't have to be a question. Pick one, you only get one.
All right, only got one. I'm curious if there's an incident that spans multiple schools, specifically maybe like the middle school. What's like the sharing of resources, tracking and monitoring that goes on in those situations?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were collaboratively with each other to try to figure out what the best plan of action would be. I can speak to the fact that I've gone, for example, over to another middle school and done the my student happened to be a target, and there, and so working with another principal to have a conversation doing the investigation with that other principal as a way to help make sure, because I had a side of the story in a process, and then moving forward to having the other working with that other administrator to balance that.
Terrific. So it's not like it's siloed just between the schools. Everyone's going to be working together for the benefit of the students and the families.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Thank you. One question. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for this presentation. Just hearing what you all had said, it shows the effort, the passion, the energy that you all put into this. I don't think you all plan on going into education and really focusing on the discipline lens. I think that's really trying to teach our folks. But I'm proud to hear that you're saying, we were trying to do this. It's our responsibility. Craig, the part you said about, the aggressor is still also part of our community. So, we can't just punish them. We need to help them get better. Else we get what had happened at the baseball field. We get people that may have not been cared for, and they just escalate and impact us in different ways. I guess my question though is, what are we doing to better prepare the parents to be more proactive in helping you get what you need before things happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I think we're at a place where, whether it's through utilizing our newsletters as one opportunity to provide, an article that's talking about ways in which, students can improve their self-control and the way a parent can help guide could be one aspect. I think it's also looking, I know our substance abuse task force started with the critical conversations, using that platform to be able to provide such a valuable resource of all these different stakeholders in the community of the impact of social media, and that can be so important and powerful. I think of also just what Josh was saying too earlier about the relationship factor, and doing what we can to try to help develop strong relationships that are as best as possible, not just in a moment of crisis, but in of a celebration or to acknowledge growth.
Now, this question came up this morning at Substance Abuse Task Force around alignment. And I think one thing that we can do as a system is align the topics and the work being done. So if advisory topics include bullying and harassment, aligning our communication with families and really doing a better job at communicating kind of what we're doing, and then letting them know what the students are going to be learning about. And then also, here's what you could be doing at home. And then maybe even pair it with a night or a critical conversation where we've brought in experts in a particular area. So I think we're looking for ways to create synergy among these ideas. And I think that might help us gain some traction in these areas if we're really trying to, not every parent's going to show up to the critical conversation. But if they know that it's happening at home, it's happening at school, a newsletter's gone out, there's an opportunity to go to something maybe related and tying it into all that we do. I think we might have more of a focused effort. And I think that's one way that we're looking to streamline some information in what we do.
I would just say too, you asked kind of like, what can others do? And I think, there's no love that exists like the love that a parent has for its child, right? And so we know that that's a huge component to a successful school system is to acknowledge that. But then to say to the parents, like, if you're seeing or feeling or sensing something, we can help proactively. So like, don't wait and let it fester. And you as a parent think, I see something in my kid, I just don't know quite what. And then it ends up becoming something bigger. Like if you have that sense inside, we are parents too. We have kids that are at our own house that we see and we get nervous about, and we reach out to schools and say, hey, I'm just checking in. I've noticed this. Like that's a fine thing to do versus wait or cross your fingers. Like we're an ally in this, the school is. So like for you, for as families to hear, the school gets how much we love our children. And we want to partner with you and help, navigate any moments that are confusing because, we live in the world of young people all day, every day. Parents have maybe, depends 2, 5, 7, but it's usually, unless they're working in a school, they might not have the understanding of the social interactions and complexity. So I would welcome them to come proactively to our schools and say, I need a little assistance here. And it's no judging. Like I'd rather do it ahead of time than after the fact.
Great, thank you.
Thank you all for this presentation. Extremely informative. Thank you for the insight that you're sharing with us here. So one of the foundation principles that I think was through a lot of what you presented was the promoting a growth mindset that aims to allow students to learn from their mistakes. And I really appreciate how you touched on that, like comparing past practices of just, don't do this and punishment to updated practices. I think, Lucas, you said it well when you said, a little bit of grace goes a long way. And so, and again, you mentioned a lot of this too that you touched upon. So just kind of like when crafting these policies, what would you say is the philosophy that you're taking to balance utilizing mistakes as learning opportunities to allow for growth with ensuring that accountability and appropriate consequences are also being seen?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So the slide that you had with like updated practices compared to past practices. Right. So yes, like what would you say is like the underlying philosophy that we're looking that you're taking in the approach for that balance of the learning and the appropriate accountability? I think our students are on a continuum of learning, and the quote that we used around we teach them in different ways when they can't master a specific skill, oftentimes is a lagging skill in some capacity. When something happens. As I mentioned, we're trying to maintain a balance and oftentimes restore a balance when there's been harm done within our community. But the philosophy is around we are educators, and that means educating a young person who enters our buildings and walks through our doors in any way in which they need the education and the help. Some things apply to all because just developmentally, everyone needs to know this information. And then sometimes students need more help in a particular math, behavior,
whatever the case is. And that's our job. So I think our philosophy is around really educating students on the continuum of wherever they're at, regardless of the challenges they might have currently. But I think we have an optimism around, and you mentioned how the year started and where you are now and the success you had at the prom as one example. But we've seen that in almost every case that I can think of, students have risen to the challenge and shown growth over time when we provide feedback and work with them and give them and teach them the skills that they need.
Thank you.
Elise? I could talk about this stuff all night. This was a phenomenal presentation. I have way too many questions. Or can I do a comment, a run-on sentence comment, and then a question?
Yes.
Or a question with semicolons that separate? It's a lot. I don't know what I should choose first. Okay, so I guess I'll just start with, I appreciate so much just the teaching lens, and there are no good kids or bad kids, and like you said, Josh, just a minute ago, there's nothing stronger than a parent's love for their kid, and so if somebody else is attacking or saying mean things about my kid, then obviously that kid is a bad kid and my kid's the good kid, just because I'm the parent, and that's how we view things. And we know that, and it's always easier working with other people's kids than it is working with our own kids, because we're just so emotionally intertwined with our own kids, and that's normal and that's the way it should be. But we need administrators and school staff to be objective but still be supportive and nurturing, no matter what side our kid is on, I guess, right? So how does that lead into a question in a succinct way? Let's see. So I also appreciate you reminding us that these are young people who are just learning about the world. Like, we're not here to judge them. We're not here to reprimand them and shame them for a certain behavior. And like, if we do, and they sort of get that stamp, like, I'm a bad kid, I, brought drugs to school, or I, was in a physical altercation, or I said the wrong thing at the wrong time. And it's sort of like, people will take on that identity, right? And they'll carry that with them into their future, into being an adult, being a community member in the future. And so I think really like that growth mindset that you echoed so many times, and that lens of education, and that like ties into the restorative practices piece. Really, that you're still in school. This is where we're helping you learn about the world. Anyways, I'm not a fan of punishment, obviously. So we know that when students don't feel connected to school, it all sort of is the same train of thought, I think. When students don't feel connected to school, it puts them at risk for a whole host of other problems now and in the future, right? Like if you are talking to people with substance use issues, then you they talk back and about stories about their childhood. A lot of it's about isolation, right? And about not feeling connected, not feeling a part of things. And we talk about it's important students be tethered to school and have like a trusted staff member. You tell us these things a lot, and I think are very mindful of them in your practice. And Tier 1 supports are really important. Tier 1 supports are so important in building connection, right? So we know that about social emotional learning. And so we're building connection, and they're critical. All right, proactive supports are critical, but they're not flashy. And I think that's the hard thing, because it's like you're doing so much work and expecting a lot of the teachers as far as classroom management, behavior management, and social emotional learning and embedding practices within their instruction. But it's not like flashy, it's not quick, it's not like suspension, expulsion, detention. Like those are just like big and flashy and like seem really obvious. And the proactive stuff's much more subtle, and it takes a lot more time to sort of stick. And so I have hope in years to come, as we're starting with like the SEL instruction in classrooms in elementary and advisory in middle school, like as these kids are growing up and have these stronger and stronger foundations every year, they get more and more of it as they're growing up. Hopefully, Josh, when it comes to you in a couple of years or in a handful of years, they'll have a different type of foundation where restorative practices will be a little bit easier. Restorative practices don't happen overnight. Is there a period yet? No, there's no periods. There's commas.
And still no question too.
No
She's
question.
good. She's
I
on the
know.
floor, yeah.
There's a question. As the Keller and Annie Sullivan parent, I get updates on the SEL curriculum that's being implemented in the classroom or in advisory. Are parent updates happening throughout the district at all levels? That was good. That was good. All right. And it tied in. You did. I did nice. Not grammatically correct, but so anyway, so our parents, so I feel lucky that from my third grader and from my sixth grader, I get updates as to like, in advisory in middle school, once a month, they say, this is what we've been focusing on. And in third grade, they talk about, what this is the SEL skills we've been focusing on. So it's helpful for me to know. But does that happen? Like, is it just like those guys are going above and beyond and telling us, or is that sort of like across the district happening consistently?
I think across the district, you're seeing monthly updates, newsletters that provide updates on what's happening, whether it be advisory or whole school, in terms of addressing SEL skills and the climate.
And it's so important. It's like, Lucas, what you just said, this is just about, look at what you just said about sort of coordinating everything. So like the messaging is all going to be consistent. And I think that's a great, it's already begun a little bit and can sort of bleed into other community, groups. Megan?
Thank you for the presentation. And I always feel pressured, maybe from myself, to be brief.
Take all the time you need.
But anyways, I just have a couple of comments on one question. So yeah, I think this model is a great approach. It makes a lot of sense. Especially that what do you call the listing of like, these situations. If you don't know this, teach, and that applies toward how people behave as well. So, and I understand there's a process, and that there may take some time, and I trust that the administration is focused on collecting facts and protecting people's privacy. And the question is, so social media is a large responsibility, and the internet, which everybody has access to, from very early on, which is different from like when we grew up. We kind of like gained access to the internet, as we were older. So it was a different experience. There was a lot less services. Dial up for me, right? When I started, you kind of get in, check the email, maybe play the game, stuff like that. But now it's like on your phone, it's instant, it's high speed, all that sort of stuff. So is there an educational class in the risks of the internet and social media, safety / awareness that we offer to the students?
I think I can say for this grade 6 through 8, the health curriculum, they have a vertical alignment of addressing different elements of social media use and cyberbullying and things. And I know based off the new bullying policy, they're also going to be taking a closer look at that to continue to make sure what they're teaching aligns with that. And then I would say that I think we're really hopeful to be able to leverage advisory kind of as in that way as well, to talk about social media use. And then I think, those are some of the tier 1 proactive steps. And then I can speak to knowing that in the middle school level, when we do have students who have infractions of some behaviors on social media, there is often an educational component that goes along with that as well. So working to try to address that, but it is a challenge. It's things that are often not happening on school grounds at all, and then it takes up multiple days of investigation.
Sure.
The other piece, our digital learning integrationists have been working on digital citizenship, looking at the curriculum and kind of the progression through elementary school, and partnering with our schools to see at what age and at what grade can kids begin to learn about, digital safety is where it starts, but then it kind of progresses through as you hit high school, and then you see it more in the health curriculum, are those pieces. But we can't emphasize enough the number of cyber related behaviors that often originate outside of school and then make their way in, and it consumes a large amount of time to get to the truth and sift through the facts and the details, as you heard. So a lot of the work spent during the day is by our administration is really trying to get to the bottom of that and try to work through that. So another thing, as you mentioned, what can parents do? Al, I think is just monitoring your child's use of their cell phones. And it doesn't mean that we're expecting you to go and violate every bit of privacy, but any steps you can take to set expectations around cell phone use. And, it's just like when people ask the schools, like, what can we do to prevent things from happening? I ask myself that same question as a parent. What can I be doing for the 2 kids in my house to try? And I don't have it all figured out either. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I do, but ultimately, how often are they on it? What sites are they really looking at? Who are they texting with and engaging with and those types of things. I think Josh talked about giving a call. Sometimes you see something you're not really sure of, and that's a perfect opportunity to be like, look, before this is a problem, I don't know what's going on, but I'm seeing this, it's about something, and it gives an opportunity for us to intercede sooner than before more pain or more harm is caused eventually, potentially down the road.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
So on slide 10, I appreciated the comments regarding the confidentiality and privacy. I think it's important that the community realize that all students are afforded those rights. I know I would appreciate my son's privacy being respected had he been accused of something. I know with the baseball game, social media lit up with everyone wanting names and string them up, and we need to know what their consequences are. And that's just not how it works. And I think that those parents would also appreciate their child's privacy being respected. Mr. Williams, I appreciated your comments on the students still being a part of the community after any kind of discipline. I think that that's something maybe we should continue to share with families, that we're all still a community. Your kids might play baseball with some other kid. You need to still respect that we all need to work together as a whole. So I think that that's a good message to continue to share with families as well. Dave, do you have another one? Comment, question? No run-ons?
I'm sure run-ons. Thank you very much for the presentation. I hadn't said that in the beginning. I was rushed just to get out my one question. But Lucas, I really want to actually kind of build on what you said, because talking about the family and the parent involvement, just kind of like the mentioned at the beginning, the situation at the baseball field, that it's a community issue and a community response. And I really applaud all of the work that's being done at the schools by the administration, by central office. I know the hours that are going into all of these responses. These issues are also a dining room table conversation, and I truly hope the entire kind of community does see that as well, for everybody involved, that the responsibility doesn't just reside within the school, but back home as well, for everybody involved. So again, thank you very much, and I really do. Lucas, when you mentioned, kind of talking about the start of next school year, the work that like this committee had kind of put forth with the changes in the bullying policy, while that is already kind of leading to changes today, will certainly be more cemented come September. And the same I know we'll talk about it later on, but there's, we'll start to see stuff about non-discrimination, about harassment as well, that there's a lot of changes that are coming, and that will be more set in stone, come the fall. And I do look forward to see how those will play out and kind of what changes that might bring to the schools as well.
Yeah.
So throughout this whole presentation, I mean, I've been listening on this with many hats. One is a school committee member. One is a parent that is having a fifth grader that will be a middle schooler next year. and the fact that he will be freer in the sense of, or he will be getting a mobile phone with a number, and these things may be present that aren't today. And just thinking of then as a parent, if my child is being bullied or not, I'm in crisis mode. The child's in crisis mode, and I think as a parent, I think Denise released it said, you want to get this resolved ASAP. I guess, how do we, as a school district, ensure that we keep the parents lockstep in what's happening so that they're aware, because they want it to happen quickly, but obviously we want it to due process, due diligence, and make sure that all the parties are afforded the right investigation. So how do we make sure that folks are aware as things are happening and they're not necessarily coming back on a regular basis and saying, hey, what's going on? Or I haven't heard of things. Like, how do we tighten that up?
I think there's a expectation of responsiveness that we're always trying to align and be ready for it, because we know like parents don't call the school for no reason. If you're getting an email or some type of bullying report, there's likely been some type of emotional situation. So it's upon, I think, the administrator's responsibility to connect and keep in the loop as frequently as possible, sharing numbers, sharing, here's when our next meeting is going to be. That's in the best cases that works out well. And then the finding is aligned with what the reporter kind of thought anyways, and that's great. But then there are times where things get in the way, a ball is dropped. And I think, someone mentioned like affording grace and trying to work as a community and understand the complexities of these situations. And, I know I could speak for the team that I work with. There's no one that would egregiously avoid the responsibility of completing an investigation and not keeping someone in the loop. There are moments, though, where the workload is overwhelmed to a point where the response isn't as quick as perhaps someone would like. And I think we all experience that in different ways, whether it be trying to get food ordered from the grocery store, which obviously isn't as emotional as your child being interacted with a bullying situation, or something as severe as waiting in an emergency room. Right? We're like, why can't I be seen right now? This is ridiculous, and everywhere in between. And so I think, kind of like learning about one another, our practices, and trust, creating some trust. And I think moments like this, where we're kind of in public, sharing our processes, welcoming feedback, and recognizing our want is for people to feel supported and safe. That's a message I would like to send. But in terms of like a policy that could somehow manage or mandate the response that folks would like. I don't know. That's not something I've worked with before, but
I think we have solid practices as a district, and I think we talked about supportive measures as a first step. So upon a report, providing that support and working with the students involved to try to create a level of comfort and safety as an investigation takes place would be key. Communicating with families, letting them know when they can expect a follow-up often goes a long way. As Josh said, there are situations where, we would love to be able to take information and turn that around in a quick manner. There's also procedural regulations depending on the offense that we're also bound by. And, we talk about strategizing for an investigation. Oftentimes you need to strategize based on the complaint and what type of complaint is it, because it might fall into different categories. Once again, another area that we pointed out is next steps on what can we put front facing so that people can maybe better understand kind of these processes and whatnot. And we spend a lot of time talking with families when we receive complaints around what's been shared, the nature of it, what we're looking to do. But certainly it's an area that we continue to want to grow in. And, I would also just remind people as we've kind of continued these practices, work through this to then put a lot of focus into COVID for a long time, to then come out and kind of work in a more of an environment that's more typical to what people know of school to be like. At the same time, we're still building back those systems. I talked about that a few weeks ago, is really trying to develop systems, and we're seeing areas in which we can grow and improve, and we're dedicated to that, to making that happen. So.
So and I guess just want to make sure it's okay for the parents to, because they're partnering with you. It's not necessarily you're doing the work there. It's constant communication. They should be okay to understand that, they can reach out to you and, hey, can I get an update, and understand that there may not be an update because it is a complex situation and there is a lot of moving pieces, and it may just be something as simple as we're still working on that. That's sufficient.
I think that's one of the best suggestions I can give is if you haven't heard an update, and to send an email and just say, hey, I'm looking to check in, and then I know myself as an administrator could just provide the simple update of, unfortunately, there's not an update at this time. We're working towards it, but for reasons out of our control, we don't have an update. And just to, again, continue the conversation and not have it be, people filling in their own blanks of why they're not receiving information is so important.
Agreed. And the last thing, just comment. One of the things that I've learned is with the absence of information, people just make things up. So I think it's rather than just making it up on your own, I think just ask and try to help fill in those blanks and close those puzzle pieces. So I'm done.
As you touched on when talking about the tier 1 proactive approaches, the best solution to any problem is prevention, and the best way we can do our part to prevent student behavioral issues is to provide them with the supports that they need. And so, could you maybe just touch upon briefly the proactive approaches that you mentioned and the support services that we're providing to help students cope with the impacts that the pandemic has had on their social, emotional, and learning development?
Sure. I mean, well, first off, just as like a point, having, not a lot of experience in returning to school after an 18-month hiatus, we've learned quite a bit about, I don't mean to be dismissive. I hope it doesn't come across that way, but I do feel like at some level, like we're still digesting the reality. And as we've gotten more comfortable with it, we put in, like, as an example, working with the Wellesley Women's Hospital. I believe that's the title of the organization.
Center for Women.
Sorry, Wellesley Center for Women. And we did some screening, both for middle school and high school students regarding like a mood check, and really take an inventory on where our students are and what are their needs and how can we make adjustments to our experiences in school to kind of help address that. So that's like a small example of proactive response, although it's somewhat reactive to the pandemic, but it's proactive in terms of what are we going to design for advisory lessons for next year. And a lot will be around the feedback we've received from these screenings, as well as the Metro West Health Survey. So I think, in that regard, we're being proactive around what we're continuing to understand students need. And I think we're finally at a place now where things have calmed down enough for us to look at it intellectually versus it being more like a triage situation. So more to come, but from the high school at least, but definitely with that lens of understanding a bit more where our students are.
I think the efforts are very similar at the middle level.
Thank you.
No follow-up?
No.
Semicolon? No, nothing? Elise?
To piggyback on what Dave was asking about Tier 1, so you talked a lot at the beginning about Tier 1 supports and how the general ed classroom teachers are really the first line there. They're managing so much of the behavior within the classrooms that doesn't escalate to a different level, doesn't have to call the office, those types of things. So what training and support have the gen ed staff had so far, or do you think they should or would benefit from in the future as far as managing Tier 1 behavior within the classroom?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, some of the work that the SEL committee did prior to the pandemic really actually put the teachers in a great position where there was each, for the 5 competencies, there was a competency of the month, and it provided this wealth of strategies for teachers who were trialing them all in 2019, 2020, and they were able to pick it up, and it became part of their practice. That was a really fortuitous effort as this all was unfolding. Yeah, I think. Sorry, go ahead. Oh, I was going to say that I think speaking from the middle level perspective, we've dedicated a lot of our professional development tied to helping with advisory strategies, different activities that could be done during that time. But also each middle school has, is in different places. But, for example, we At Remington, we established what we called our 5 big rules, things that we, expectations that we want our students to follow. And then we provided in a PD different scenario work in which we had students, we described fictitious students who had rule infractions and asked the question about what is this behavior communicating? What are some strategies that you could put in place and respond to this beyond calling the office? And then created that kind of best practice share out, which was, I think, I can say that our PD has really been focused on that, on those strategies and implementing what we picked up in 2019 and really continue to adjust as we saw students come back.
Yeah, and I think the high school similarly had that same pattern of growth within the importance of building relationships within the classroom, kind of student-centered focus so that they can feel owned and connected to what they're learning. But we kind of earlier mentioned this e-hall pass program that we recently heard feedback from the staff. They were seeing extended periods of time where large groups of students were out using the restrooms, maybe beyond what would be kind of in a normal spectrum. And so we examined some options and our DLIs found this solution. They did a great job training our teachers. And now we're in the midst of experimenting with it to see whether or not this is perhaps a safe alternative to the more old traditional paper pass system. And so far, and I can assure you, our student body would not be afraid to share their negative feedback with myself or our administration. And they've all kind of understood no, this kind of makes sense. And, that doesn't mean we didn't ruffle a few feathers, but in the end, I think we're supporting our teachers in the tier 1 by giving them some tools that aren't going to cut into too much of their lesson, but allow for there to be a consistent experience for students and staff around students' whereabouts, accountability, et cetera. So all small, trying to not be a police state, but also trying to kind of create some understanding of where the 1,700 folks are at a given time.
Right. And really, but it comes down to like school culture and climate, really, when we're shifting from, old school discipline that all schools always used to do to this more proactive approach, social emotional learning, restorative practices. And that's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that happens easily or quickly. And it really, there's a lot of training and getting people on the bus as far as understanding the value of it. And it might seem like a little bit more work, but it's actually going to pay off tenfold down the line as far as having to react or respond to behaviors in the future. So thanks for that.
Can I just chime in for a second? Because I think there's a couple foundational pieces that are important to emphasize. And it's a little repetitive because it was in the slide, but responsive classroom has been an enormous investment on the part of the school district prior to the pandemic. So new teachers, Dr. Edwards, when she was here as assistant superintendent for teaching and learning, would set up cohorts of new teachers, whether in this district or in collaboration with other districts, and run kind of a year-long professional development for teachers K-8 around responsive classroom. That was in the follow-up to kind of a district-wide focus on responsive classroom at the elementary and middle schools. So that's something that had been done with decreased enrollment and fewer newer teachers at the K-8 buildings. We haven't had as much of a need to invest in that, but it is an area that people are kind of applying and well-versed in, and that foundation was there prior to the shutdown in 2020. And then again, there's been some turnover in staff as well, but Jessica Minahan, who is a well-known behaviorist in this area, had been in the district and had done some professional development district-wide. She is the one whose quote we love to use, and Craig used it earlier, behaviors communication. What is the communication telling us? And a lot of her language and the concepts that she introduced are still kind of discussed and talked about as a philosophy and mindset among people in the district. Work is ongoing. I would point to the Speak Up at School in terms of continuing to deepen that around interrupting microaggressions. And then Lucas talked about refreshing people's skill in terms of interrupting bullying, which mirrors that. It's very, very similar to kind of intervening in those moments. So I just wanted to add kind of 2 cents to really emphasize in particular responsive classroom.
I have no more questions. Thank you.
So on slide 16, you highlighted the times of day where most of the incidents are happening. If we know when this is occurring, is there a way to more closely monitor the students? I know we can't be at a one-on-one student to teacher ratio to ensure nothing ever happens. I can't imagine the budget ramifications to hiring that much more staff. But have we looked at anything to have more staff during the unstructured transition times?
So I think it's under supervised and it's unstructured. I think the nature of a dismissal, for example, or a bus ride where a bus driver is driving, there's a bit of a resource issue as far as our ability to necessarily police or supervise those types of situations. Proactively, we look at, okay, we have a football game. We know we're going to have a lot of kids there. So we know we need to plan who's going to be there and do that. Other sports, other activities, you don't predict necessarily large fan turnout or large fan behavior. You might strategize differently. But I just think about where we put our resources. And once again, we would love to have an administrator in every single unstructured area, but there's a reality to it as well. So I think training kids around the skills and expectations in those areas and reinforcing that is a way that we can try to help be more preventative and set clear expectations. But ultimately, I don't think we'll ever prevent negative behavior eliminate it completely from an unstructured area. But certainly the question's well taken, but that would be my response to that. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, earlier in the year, we put standing desks in different sections of the hallways across different corners so that, folks could, during their prep, do their work standing and kind of just being visible, which oftentimes is like the most important part of redirecting behavior. It's not even, you don't have to say anything. You just have to physically kind of be within earshot. And we're always, we have weekly meetings. Okay, here are the events. Here's how we'll distribute ourselves. And there are inevitably moments where it's like, all right, well, we don't really have anyone per se. Sometimes we'll elicit support from the police department and hire a detail to try to get some, folks there. And that does work a bit. But I do think someone earlier mentioned, like, it's a community effort. I mean, if you're at a game and you're a community member, an adult, like, you don't need to like yell or anything, but you could just say, hey, come on, like I heard that, that's not okay. And in my communications with community members, they'll say, like I've said, hey, enough, and that's all it really takes in most instances. I know that might someone say, well, that's not my responsibility. And it is awkward. You're walking up to a group of people who maybe you don't know, and you're just observing something that you don't find to be okay. But this is our town. Like, of course you can say that. You can say that's enough. And my experience with the students at Franklin High School is they knew it. And whether it was one or a couple, they'll, oh, you're right. Oh, geez, I'm sorry, and that's kind of what it takes. But there does need to be that marking the moment, that kind of disrupting that and just acknowledging it. And I think that's something, Al, again, you asked, I think earlier, like, what can we do? And that's something we could do. We could kind of like build our own skill set as to how to like see something that doesn't sit well with us and how do you interrupt it in a way that's peaceful. I'm not suggesting you get in the mix and start like, separate, like that's not the answer, but it's like, just say, hey, that's enough.
An example, just one more example. I know it's getting late, but earlier in the year in the fall season, if you remember, we put out a communication to elementary parents not to drop a kid off at the game.
Yeah.
And people responded by and large, and realized, I don't think people thought that was an issue until we said, hey, we're having a hard time supervising. And that's an example of where the community responded and said, you know what, I'm not going to drop, I'm going to make sure they're at least with an adult, even if I'm not the adult. And that was an example of, hey, we have a problem, let's come up with a community-based solution.
Thank you. Go around now, one more time, Dave.
Elise, can I ask 3 then? Okay. Strike that. Okay. Okay, I know this is fluid depending on the day, but could you give us an estimate of the percentage of students at each tier? Like, I know it's not a hard and fast triangle perfectly, but like just for, you know, because we're talking so much about like the investigations and but really that's not a huge percentage of the student body. So like just a, I don't know.
I think I think the shift to thinking about like the multi-tiered system of support is the idea that it's more so like how often we're seeing the behaviors as opposed to like how often defining a kid as like a part of the tier three.
Yep.
But I think, you know, it's a very small percentage that, you know, that dedicate so much of your time, you know, and that's just the nature of doing an investigation well is, and what all goes along with that in terms of making sure that the victim the target feels safe and protected, and the family does as well. To then also that the aggressor, you're working with the parents and the family to partner with them and follow through with what's going to really help them learn from this. It does take a tremendous amount of time while balancing the tier 1-ish to 2-ish behaviors that happen that teachers do appreciate the administrative support with as well.
Right. And I think that was sort of like the point I was trying to get at. So it's like a small percentage of in those heavy duty investigations, but a huge amount of time and, you know, attention and sensitivity and resources. Okay. Thanks. And I can continue. Thank you. So as sort of a follow-up to that, because it seems like the assistant principals are really like a critical role in this whole process and very busy, and we're glad to have them and appreciate all their hard work. So we do hear sometimes in the community sort of questions about why do we have assistant principals? Like what does that role even mean or do? And I think anybody that listened to this presentation probably is like, whoa, that's a big job. There's a lot going on. And I'm sure that they have other things on their plate as well. But like, so is that really the person in the building oftentimes who's like driving this train as far as like organizing who's doing what and who called who and emails and talking to kids? Like, is that usually the point person or is it the principal?
I think the high school I can speak to because I had the role of assistant principal at the high school. And that definitely was the driving force of that responsibility. I'd say at the middle level, it's more of a split of kind of whoever is available is going to take on that challenge in the moment and play point person. Whereas I do think, and then obviously and Josh, you can speak better than I can about the very serious things that then end up coming to you. If it was an assistant principal, it goes beyond the assistant principal's decision making.
Yeah, I mean, we work to align our 3 house offices. So we have a first, second, and third house office. Each has an assistant principal. They each have around 600 kids that they oversee, from something like tardiness to tier 3, infractions. And their work is to align with each other and to investigate and to allow for there to be consistent application of our handbook to whomever the student is, right? So that alignment is critical, that they're kind of communicating, here's what's happened, here's what's going on. They're simultaneously evaluating 30 plus teachers, writing reports, going in, visiting observations, evaluating on goals, and giving them in the end kind of ratings regarding proficient, exemplary, et cetera. In addition to that, they're running our clubs, they're running our master schedule, they're authorizing field trips, they're overseeing IEP meetings, they're overseeing supervising games, running IST programs. So for anyone who would like to talk about the role and responsibility of an assistant principal, I would welcome them in for coffee, and I would love to show them their weekly schedule. It's exhausting work that gets very little credit, and unfortunately at times gets kind of called out as like, what could they possibly do? Because honestly, to your point, Elise, like, it's a very small percentage of families that interact with the assistant principals, but it's those micro moments that have macro impact in our school. If we don't take those small percentages of things seriously and address them with thoughtfulness and a response that's legal and aligned and bulletproof, I'll say, truthful, we're going to have major problems within our school. And the reason we don't is because of the hard work that they do on a consistent basis with, yes, a small percentage of students and a small number of infractions. But if we weren't to do those well, we would not have been able to have a prom. We would not have been able to, look forward to our senior week. We would have much different problems up on that presentation than tardies and, a little disruption in class. We would be having, unfortunately, you see examples in the state of much more egregious acts. And we don't have those with 1,700 students because of the hard work our assistant principals do.
And they also have to create the sub schedules and cover classes when we don't get enough subs as well. They wear so many hats, and we can't thank them enough for all they do to drive this work and the entire climate and culture of the building.
Well, send them our appreciation. Also, I think this really sort of shined a light on one little corner of the great work that they're doing. Okay, last one. So how might this process work if a student has a disability and the behavior might be a manifestation of the disability? Because that can become a little bit gray.
So there's processes for that, I think, through special education law. We look at, first off, there's guidance on when suspending students not to exceed, and really to look at if a behavior is a manifestation of a student's disability. We look at that throughout. We don't just wait until we're about to hit the 10th suspension day, but that's an ongoing thing that happens much earlier, right from the beginning. Anytime an investigation occurs or there's any type of disciplinary consequence, oftentimes Mrs. Morano gets a phone call, or I get the call and I talk through where we're at. I meet with Dr. Ahern and Mrs. Morano and kind of talk through. And then she's copied on any letter for any student on an IEP so that she can continue to track in her department as well. Every time we have a situation, whether it's someone on a victim's end who's on an IEP or an aggressor's end, is really trying to look at the behavior and how we can best support the family on either end. There's also safeguards in place during IEP meetings where bullying question is brought up on an annual basis, but certainly as part of that process so that we can continue to build those relationships and make sure that we're following the proper protocols on top of that. So anything to add to that, Mrs. Morano?
I do. I also wanted to add that even if a child's not on an IEP, but we're seeing multiple disciplinary infractions, that's something we really do consider through the IST process as well. Is there an underlying skill deficit that needs that is a result of a disability, and does that student need specialized instruction to learn that skill and improve on that skill? So we really do look at those things and consider those things as well, especially if we're seeing multiple disciplinary infractions.
Yeah, that's important. And I guess that speaks to sort of the documentation piece too, as far as like the looking for patterns.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
I appreciate you all touching on incidents that happen outside of school during the presentation. I know you're up against a lot, and schools are just constantly being asked to tackle more and more, social media, mental health, food insecurities, while also trying to teach our students like math and reading. A lot of issues we're hearing about in schools today just demonstrates how much work we still have in front of us. It's a teaching experience, not only for our schools, but the entire community. Changing the climate of a district is not something that's fixed overnight. So we appreciate you guys coming in tonight and talking about your plans for the spring and the future. And we look forward to hearing more updates from you guys. And, it's 9:15 and you guys are still here. So thank you so much. And Lucas has to be here. You guys,
yes,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys a lot. Thank you very much.
So good evening. Thank you for the time.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, you guys can stick around. You don't have anything else to do, right?
You have no meetings the rest of the week, right, Josh?
Yeah.
If I might, thank you to Lucas and Craig and Josh for the presentation. One thing that I wanted to mention to the committee is you'll be tasked, and Lucas brought this up, about reviewing the school handbook. Mm-hmm. They're pretty large documents. And I think a question often comes, can we get those can we get those like in advance of the approval meeting? And you have them more or less. You have the school handbooks now, and it may be something you want to take a look at earlier rather than later. You'll be presented with changes kind of in probably the August timeframe. But if you wait until that meeting, there might be a lot of reading to do. So thought I would make that suggestion in the moment.
I feel like there's a teacher in you. The test is coming up, everybody.
Might want to preview that information.
Once a teacher, always a teacher.
All right, discussion action items. Dr. Ahern?
Sure. So the first two discussion action items are related to our two collaboratives. We belong to BICO, which is here in Franklin, and Accept, which is in Natick. It's a collaboration across districts. It initially began to support special education services, but our collaboratives also provide things like professional development, job-alike groups. Some districts participate in their transportation services. We do not. Consultation services. And it's a really, I think, great way and cost-effective way for districts to be collaborating in a formal way together. The structure of the collaboratives is that there's a board of directors, and typically the board of directors in our two collaboratives is represented by the superintendent of schools at each district. Member district serves on the board of directors, and a vote is required around this time every year, and we communicate that to the boards. So with that, I recommend the appointment of Lucas Jagir to serve as the Franklin representative to the BICO board for the 22-23 school year.
Okay. Is there a motion to appoint Lucas Jagir to serve as the BICO board Franklin representative for the 2022-2023 school year as discussed?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion questions? Okay. Seeing none, the vote will come on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Motion carries with Ms. Bernstein being absent. All right. I am very excited to do this. Elise has to go into the audience. She needs to recuse herself.
Okay. So this next one is related to the Accept Collaborative, again in Natick, similar premise as I had teed up before. I recommend the appointment of Lucas Jagir to serve as the Franklin representative to the Accept Board of Directors for the 22-23 school year.
Okay. Is there a motion to accept Lucas Jagir to serve as the Accept Board Franklin representative for the 2022-2023 school year as discussed?
So moved.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion, questions? Okay, seeing none, the vote will come on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, carries 6. Okay. All right, 5, 1, and 1. Ms. Stokes can come back.
Great.
A parent, maybe. All right. All right, so C, policy first reading.
So coming to you from the last policy subcommittee is policy ADF, the wellness policy. I'm going to defer to Lucas, who leads SWAC, to talk about how this came to be.
Okay, I'll keep my comments as brief as possible. As you know, we were in year 1 of the School Wellness Advisory Council coaching model through the DESE, which is the Department of Education. And we were tasked to put together and revise our policy. So the SWAC this year, that was the focus of our work. This is the product of the meetings that took place each month, monthly meetings that took place throughout the school year to put together a SWAC policy. Just for information for the community, they have a tool in which you can examine your current school's policy. It's called the WellSat. And basically what it does is it looks at the components of your policy, and then it provides you with some feedback. You examine it to see what's missing, what needs to be added. And also, do you have things in there that you're either currently not doing, or are you currently engaging in practices that aren't represented in your policy? So those are all the things that took place. We spent a tremendous amount of time on this. I want to thank Miriam Goodman, who's also on SWAC as well, for helping to co-facilitate this work. There's a lot of nutritional components in here. It speaks to physical activity and overall wellness. So it's up for review, and we're happy to answer any questions. If Miriam, do you have any further comments to make on the policy?
I would just say that the School Wellness Advisory Council really examined this really thoroughly, came out with a lot of good information, and kudos to the group as a whole.
Okay, any questions?
I recommend moving policy ADF, the wellness policy, to a second reading as discussed.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion, questions? All right, seeing none, vote will come on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, carries. Discussion only items, none. Information matters, superintendent evaluation, Elise.
No new updates. We're expecting to review the evidence this month.
Budget, Dave McNeil.
Budget has not met since our last meeting.
Have we heard anything about like a joint budget? So like I know we had that. Is there going to be another one?
We, as far as I know, there has not been any updates on that. I know originally there was an idea to have one in April and that didn't manifest itself. So I don't know if Miriam or Dr. Hearn ever heard anything otherwise.
I haven't heard anything otherwise.
No, the calendar's filling up. If I had to add something.
Yeah, I understand.
Policy, Dave Callahan.
Yeah, so we met just last week. Got forward, obviously, the wellness policy. We just had a first read on, and we can expect in our June meeting, likely. There's, as I kind of mentioned earlier in the meeting, we took a look at the non-discrimination and harassment policy. That is, Dr. Hearn, correct me if I'm wrong, but we kind of sent that off to the legal team for review, and it'll kind of come back to us before we look at it for a first read. And then we have our next meeting for policy on June 8th.
Okay. Thank you. Community relations. So unfortunately, due to months and months of scheduling conflicts with our state legislators, we'll be canceling this year's legislative forum. Very upset that it won't happen, but we'll regroup and get at it next year. We'll be arranging a community relations meeting soon once we've got everyone feeling better and can hopefully get something on the calendar in advance of the strawberry stroll. So, yeah. Space needs and facilities assessment. Mr. Charles.
Yeah, thank you. We met today, reviewed some more data regarding the building projects in town, how home movement compared this year compared to last year. Just the space needs for the specialized programs, and then also just talk through the utilization rate of the current schools today. We shared at the Franklin District map layers, which is really informative. So folks that aren't aware, they can go to the town and see where the breakout of all the schools go to, and houses go to the various schools. And then lastly, we talked through just getting an update around Davis there in terms of the impacts of the MSBA. Just really waiting for them to do their due diligence on ensuring that if we do anything with Davis there, it does not impact us down the road. So good stuff. We do have a meeting next on June 6th, which will be our kind of our wrap up. And then after that, the June 14th school committee will be here to package up the information and share it with the broader audience.
Okay. Joint PCC.
So we have not met since our last meeting, so I will provide an update on our next meeting.
School Wellness Advisory Council.
Okay, so we met on May 3rd. We had our final meeting of the year with the community. We are working on a special project regarding the farmers market and setting up a table there to promote some healthy choices and look at our programming and support our community with some of those pieces. The other piece we looked at is we are signed up to take place we signed up for the second year of that coaching model, where it's really focused on putting your policy into practice. So next year's SWAC will focus on kind of how we can take that policy and really have a greater impact and implement some programs or support programs within our schools.
Thank you. CPAC Elise.
The next CPAC meeting is June 9th.
June 9th. That's gracious. All right. Substance Abuse Task Force met this morning, Lucas.
Met this morning. It was our final meeting of the year. We're also looking at putting out a survey to families regarding the Critical Conversation series that took place to get some feedback. What worked, what didn't, what would people like to see moving forward, so that that can help inform our planning for next year as that group meets. We're also looking at the organization of SWAC and Substance Abuse Task Force to look to see where we can find some synergy among those groups, since we have people working towards some similar causes in some ways, but while keeping their own identity. So more to come on that as well. And I want to thank our school committee members who were part of those committees for the work that you did all year to support those. I see Al and Dave working with SWAC and with substance abuse, Dave and Denise and Elise working in SWAC as well. We appreciate that. And Mrs. Morano and Mrs. Goodman, who partnered with me on those to help facilitate. It's been a pleasure, and it's really rewarding work for all of us to engage with the community in that way.
Thank you. DEI committee, our next meeting is May 25th, correct, Dr. Hearn?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. All right. That's it for information matters. Consent agenda.
Sure. If you want to hold anything for discussion, just say hold. Approval of minutes. I recommend approval of the minutes from the April 26, 2022 special and regular school committee meetings as detailed. I recommend acceptance of a check for $1,000 for the Fernando P. Baglioni Scholarship as detailed. I recommend acceptance of a check for $2,988.25 from Cadence Education for district-wide supplemental supplies as detailed. I recommend acceptance of two checks totaling $3,600 as follows: $3,000 from Logic Tree Field Trip for DECA Student Activity Account and $600 from the Franklin Cultural Council for supplemental supplies FHS gift account. And I recommend acceptance of a check for $5,428 from the Keller PCC for field trips as detailed.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as detailed?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, any discussion, questions? All right, seeing none, vote will come on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, motion carries. All right. All right. Citizens' comments. Are there any citizens in the audience, either in person or online, who would like to make a comment on an item not on tonight's agenda? I think everybody's asleep. All right. New business, Dr. Hearn.
At the next meeting, as Elise had talked about, I will be presenting evaluation evidence for myself personally, and then also some updates related to the district improvement plan. I do anticipate some field trips to come before you for approvals. And just a reminder too, that for the community, in particular, that the school committee's budget is going to FinCom on Thursday night at 6:30. That is here in council chambers. There's also a Zoom component.
Good reminder.
And live stream to YouTube.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. All right. Executive session. So as indicated at the beginning of the meeting, we will be adjourning to executive session and not returning to open meeting. All right. Let's go. Pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the FEA, RN unit, as an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the school committee and the chair so declares. Pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A2, to discuss strategy and preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel. Is there a motion to adjourn into executive discussion as discussed?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, vote will come on the motion. We'll do a roll call vote. Camille is absent. Dave Callahan?
Yes.
Al Charles?
Yes.
Dave McNeil?
Yes.
Elise Stokes?
Yes.